So our planetary scientists do a lot of field work. This is me in Iceland on a volcano, trying to understand current volcanic processes on Earth and past volcanic processes on Earth to better understand volcanoes that we see throughout the solar system. In the bottom right, that is an event in Death Valley National Park. So I help lead the Death Valley Dark Sky Festival since it was Mars Fest years and years ago, with amazing partners in the park. I'm just a supporter of this festival. It's the park's event, but we are very, very happy to come year after year and help people understand the science that's going on there and the exploration that's occurred there, and why this is such a special site for maybe reasons that people didn't know about before. So I'm going into too much detail here, but I also get to do things like go to Fenway and to baseball stadiums and help people understand, about NASA science, and then watch a baseball game and we connect, physics and orbits and things like that. And then I talk to people in the media, but I started in the top left there. Before I came to NASA, I did lots of very cool stuff, including working as an SCA in Canyonlands National Park in the Needles District. And there is me up there with my fellow SCA member, and we got to do public education in Canyonlands and in public lands around the park, and lots of education and outreach there. So it was really fun. It's kind of fun that everyone that works at NASA has a different path to get here. But my experience with national parks has helped me continue to talk with people at parks, which I continue to love doing. And it's one of my favorite parts of my job. All right, but let's jump into why you came here. So solar eclipses, we have one coming right up, and I am curious, have you ever seen a solar eclipse? And if you have, what was it like? So I hope some of you have, and I'd love to hear some stories. And in order to see this, I'm going to take this slide down so that I can see your answers. So please put in the chat, have you seen a solar eclipse? And if so, what was it like? Oh, ooh, so this is fun. Surprisingly cold. That is very cool. Ooh, lots of eclipse folks here. Excellent. Oh man, that makes you even more excited, I'm sure, for the upcoming eclipses. And for those of you who haven't, these are some really great words that are coming up here. So please continue to share. I'm gonna keep going back, but I'd love to hear more. Oh, let's see. I wonder if this might be fun. Okay, can I share my window? Okay, here we go. Ooh, shadow effects. Yes, those are so cool. That is really fun. Okay, we can jump back here, but I'd love to hear more. Please share with each other experiences. I mean, I'm really happy to be here, but I kind of see myself as, a focal point that drew you in this evening, I hope. But you are also among really amazing people. And if other people have seen eclipses, you might want to hear from them. So feel free to share. And I did, I got to see an eclipse in 2017. It was my first solar eclipse. And it was amazing. It was one of the most powerful experiences I have ever had in my life. I got to help lead the NASA presence along with my colleague, Anita Davis, who's from Earth to Sky, one of our connections between NASA and national parks and other public lands. And we got to work with a lot of kids, a lot of students. We had people from all over the world that came. The shadows were amazing. The lighting was amazing. It was incredible. My 3-year-old daughter was jumping up and down and yelling, yay, 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 yay. It was really, really very powerful. And I'm so excited that we're going to get to do it again. So coming up just around the corner here, we have an annular solar eclipse. So this is something where the sun is not fully blocked. So you get to see a ring of sunlight around the moon. And over on the right, that's the path that the annular eclipse, the path of annularity, and it's going to spread, or go from, through the United States, through Central South America. So a lot of people in the Americas are going to be able to see the annularity, and then a lot more people will be able to see a partial eclipse. And that's what those lines that sort of fade into darker colors. The lighter, brighter colors have more of the sun covered, and the darker ones have less of it covered, but still get to experience a partial eclipse. So I'd love to know where you're planning to be. Where are you going to go to watch this eclipse? And I would have to pop out of here. Bridget, can you yell out some places where people are going?
Yeah. We have well, a few people said Great Basin, of course, Beaver, Goosenecks, Mexican Hat, Ely, Glen Canyon. We had a Great Basin again, South Carolina, Black Rock research project with students in Elko. So we have some educators in here, Richfield, Utah. Yep.
Wonderful.
It's going to be a party in Great Basin now.
Fabulous. Well, you are in the right place. That's going to be quite a spectacular show there, I'm sure. So excellent. I'm glad plans are made. That is very good. So let's talk a little bit about what you're going to see and why you're going to see that. So basics here for a lunar eclipse. This is when the sun, earth, and moon line up in space, but the earth is in the middle of a lunar eclipse, and the shadow of the earth is cast upon the moon. In a solar eclipse, you have the sun, moon, and earth lining up, and this time the moon is in the middle, and the moon casts a shadow on the earth. So this is just a slide to show basic configuration. It is absolutely ridiculously, totally not to scale. Illumination is all wrong, but this is how it is in space. So let's look at a little bit to scale. So this is actually still not quite to scale, but we're going to take a look at a slightly better view, actually a much better view of what a lunar eclipse looks like from space. So you're seeing the Earth in the middle and the moon traveling around in orbit. And now we're going to rotate so that path it's tracing out is, its orbital path. And you'll see that it's slightly tilted with respect to what we call the ecliptic, that sort of a plane, actually not sort of, exactly, a plane that sort of stretches out from the sun's middle like a big hula hoop out into space. And the planets all orbit in that plane, but the moon does not. So the moon is slightly tilted, and so often we see a full moon because it's just above or below the path. And let's move. But for when during an eclipse, they line up perfectly. For a solar eclipse, we have sort of the same thing. Most of the time, the moon is above or below the earth, and then the path, that shadow, that sort of, it looks like an ice cream cone kind of, and the moon is the big ice cream cone on top, and then the point that's stretching towards the earth, that dark cone is the darkest part of the shadow, and that point is where we see a total solar eclipse. And the rest of it, you'd see a partial eclipse, that larger shadow.
Right. Andrea, can I just pause for a second? We're having a few people with technical difficulties. Can you do me a favor and unshare your screen and then share your screen again?
Yeah, sure. Let me do that.
I got a message that it wasn't it wasn't changing the slides. So
oh no. Okay, let's try again. Okay, let's see. How is that looking? Can you see that?
Yep, I think it's working. All right. Yep, we got it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for Thanks for keeping me informed. So yeah, I will also say that I'm hoping you get to see this in real time. I'm happy to share. I'm going to share this with Great Basin afterwards, and all the links to where these visualizations are. You can go find them if you wish, or you can email me and we can get you connected with the sources. But I'll try to describe a little bit better in case you're having technical difficulties what you're actually seeing.
I think that fixed it, so we're good. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So now I wanted, since we have 2 eclipses coming up, I wanted to sort of walk through a little bit why we sometimes have an annular or a partial eclipse. Really, an annular is the one I'm focusing on, and sometimes a total eclipse, because in October we get an annular one, and in April we'll get a total one. And so I want to sort of walk you through a little bit of what you're seeing here before we start the animation. So a few terms, or a few things to look at. So in the middle, you see the Earth, and that line, the yellow line with the little star there, that's pointing towards the sun. So you'll notice as this goes around, the daytime side of the Earth is always pointing towards the sun. So the Earth will rotate. And then we'll have 2 terms to look for. One is apogee, that's the farthest away the moon is in its orbit around the Earth, and perigee, the moon's closest place to the Earth in its orbit. So the moon actually doesn't have a perfectly circular orbit. Sometimes it's closer to the Earth and sometimes it's farther away, and that really influences what we're going to see during a solar eclipse. So I'll get this started. So you can see the moon is orbiting the Earth, and when it is far, when the moon is far from the Earth, then it's it's not quite apogee. It's not quite as far away as it can possibly get. But when it's farther away, we get an annular eclipse because it's just not close enough to the Earth in order to block out all of the light from the sun. I'll show these both again, but here is what we're going to see next. So from the October 14th eclipse, then we have a few more times the moon will go around the Earth, and then it's going to be in a different part of its orbit come April. And here we're going to have a total solar eclipse. So it's kind of a complicated figure, but what I really want to emphasize is that sometimes the moon is closer to the Earth, sometimes it's farther away. When it's closer, see how it's like almost as close as it can possibly get within that sort of shaded disk, we get a total solar eclipse. We get a really special occurrence. And so we're able to see the moon completely block the bright disk of the sun, and we'll get a total solar eclipse. Because they're a little bit complicated, I'll show this one more time. This is what we're going to get in October. When the moon is closer to the Earth, we get a total solar eclipse. When it's farther away, like it will be in October, it's going to be not able to block the whole sun. And so that's why we get an annular eclipse. And one more time, what we're going to see in April. So this is actually real time from October through April 8th. So this is just made by NASA's Scientific Visualization Studio for these 2 eclipses in particular, which is really great because a lot of visualizations are just generalized, but these are not. These are from Ernie Wright in NASA Scientific Visualization Studio for presentations just like this. I was like, Ernie, I need something to show people. So he delivered, and he's amazing. All right, he also made this one. So this one is for the April 8th eclipse. So not what we're going to see next month, but I wanted to show again another representation of what's happening during a solar eclipse. And this is the total solar eclipse coming in April. This is the actual path of the shadow of the moon crossing the surface of the Earth. And so that tiny little dot, like the bottom of the ice cream cone, if it intersects the surface of the Earth, like if there's a tiny bit of that cone that reaches the Earth, then we get a total solar eclipse. If the ice cream cone's just a little farther away, it pinches out before it reaches the surface, and we get an annular eclipse. We only have the umbra. And so then it's just sort of partial for everybody. But that's what it will look like come April. And that's also more true to scale than the previous ones. All right. So jumping ahead here, lunar eclipses, I work for a spacecraft called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, among other ones, but that is definitely one of my favorites. And the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter observes the moon, orbits the moon all the time, and it doesn't really care about solar eclipses, but the view from the moon during a lunar eclipse is pretty cool. So this is an artist's conception of what we see during a lunar eclipse. So this again is when the sun, earth, and moon light up in space, and the shadow of the moon, the shadow of the earth is cast upon the moon. And in case you've ever looked up at a lunar eclipse and you've wondered why it's red, well, it's because of what you're looking at here. So the moon is looking back at, or, a viewer on the moon would be looking back on the earth and seeing all of the sunrises and the sunsets on earth at the same time. This moment is sunrise and sunset like all around the earth. And so that, beautiful red color that you see during a sunrise or a sunset is all adding up to cast a red glow upon the moon. And so that color can vary depending on what's in the atmosphere at the time, how much volcanic activity there's been. But it really, this is sort of like, I just love this idea. We've never actually taken a picture of this, but maybe someday astronauts will, and that would be really incredible. So the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter cares a lot when there's a lunar eclipse because it's a solar powered orbiter. And so we plan very, very carefully for these. Solar eclipses, on the other hand, are no big deal for a solar-powered lunar spacecraft. And so we get to do fun things like flip our orbiter around and point ourselves at the Earth to take a picture. So this is actually the view from the moon, really, of the August 21st, 2017 eclipse. And I don't know if you can see it well right now, but if you look in sort of towards the eastern side of the US, there's kind of a blurry, blobby, darker spot. That blurry, blobby, darker spot is actually the shadow of the moon on the Earth. And we took a picture of you. If you were out there looking at it, we have captured you. If you zoom in close, maybe you could find yourself. But that's, the whole hemisphere of the Earth looking back. But the reason that it's not a perfect circle, or maybe you couldn't tell, it kind of was fuzzy anyway, but that shadow of the moon is not a perfect circle. And instead, it's kind of a weird polygon shape. And that is because the moon is not perfectly spherical. It's not perfectly round, so it doesn't cast a perfectly round shadow. Instead, we have a really bumpy moon. So I'm going to show you here. This is the moon. It's wobbling in space. This is, moon phase and libration. This is just what the moon actually looks like if you were to track it over time based on, the tilt of the Earth and how we move around at a tilt in space. And then the moon also is tilted. So this is actually what it looks like in the sky to an observer on Earth if you were to keep tracking it. But here we have the blue line around the moon is actually the lunar topography exaggerated about 18 times. And you can see it's bumpy. And so depending on the orientation of the moon in space at the time of a solar eclipse, and particularly a total solar eclipse, those places where there are deep valleys, those are the last places, where the sun will peek through when it's like going behind the moon, or appears to be, and the first places where it will peek out as we're, coming out of totality. And those are the places where you get like Bailey's beads and things like that, where it's like the bright glow or the ring. That kind of view is dependent on the orientation of the moon in space at the moment when you are looking at the moon right then. And so what else is affecting the shadow on the moon is the shape of the Earth, actually. So the Earth is also not round, although every other eclipse before 2017, the path was calculated as if the moon was perfectly round and as if the Earth was perfectly round. But that's not great to do if you can do better, because sometimes, depending on the topography in your area, you can either be lifted into the shadow, like in B, if you are lifted into the shadow and you actually get to see an eclipse, even though if it was a round moon and around Earth, you wouldn't. Or for A, you can be lifted out of the shadow because the Earth has mountains, and maybe you would have been in the shadow if you had been on a flat plane. So this is important, especially on the edges of the shadow path. You really want to make sure that you know if you're going to see it or not, because it makes such a difference. So Ernie Wright calculated out, and this time with a colleague as well, calculated out the shape of the moon across the shadow as it's moving around in space, across the mountainous Earth as well. And you can see where the shadow is really going to be and where the edges really are for the 2023 and 2024 eclipse paths. This is available on the website listed there, and or just search NASA eclipse path, and you can find out where it is and where you should be, and how long you'd be able to see the eclipse from wherever you might be. All right, then coming up April 8th, this is what we've been talking about, the total eclipse. I also just thought I'd mention that there is a lunar eclipse coming up, but not for a long time. We're actually going to see 2 solar eclipses before we get to see a lunar eclipse in the US. So that's just kind of fun that we have them often. Everyone on Earth who's facing the moon during a lunar eclipse gets to see it, so people can see lunar eclipses more frequently. We're going to have some partial ones, but they won't be really spectacular. But for a solar eclipse, you have to be in that special spot. So they happen just as frequently as lunar ones, but they are, much more limited in terms of the audience. So you have to like travel more often to see those. All right, so I have to say from NASA, safety messaging for an annular solar eclipse coming up in October, keep those eclipse glasses on. These are some of our pictures from the 2017 eclipse. We worked with the Salem Kaiser volcanoes out in Salem, Oregon, and had the players wearing the glasses too. And this is my amazingly adorable daughter preparing and practicing using her eclipse glasses before the Homestead eclipse event. So it's really important, keep them on, keep your eyes safe. It's never safe to look directly at the sun, even during an annular eclipse. But I will add, just in case I don't talk with you before then, that during a total eclipse, please take them off during totality, because you'll really miss out if you keep them on the whole time. And I'll also say one further thing, that this is a safety message from NASA, but I will also acknowledge that there are a lot of people in our country, around the world, who really consider eclipses to be very sacred and will be, inside and respecting, the eclipse time. And so I understand, you're probably not in this presentation if that's you, but we really are very mindful that we all experience this differently, and we are very happy that so many people have such a personal relationship with this moment. Okay, I'm gonna jump ahead to some lunar science and exploration. And so for this part, I am just taking this opportunity to tell you a little bit about what you're seeing when you're looking up at the moon in the sky, and everyone's excited that the moon is blocking the sun, and that's why all eyes are up there. I say, as a lunar person, it's a really neat time to find out what is going on. So there is a tremendous amount going on with the moon. I'm going to touch on a very, very, very few things, but if you have questions, please let me know. So biggest thing that is going on in lunar science and exploration right now is that we are getting ready to go back to the moon with astronauts, and we are already on our way. So this time that we're going, we are launching on the biggest, baddest rockets ever made in the Space Launch System. We are going to build basically an international space station at the moon called the Gateway, and that is going to allow us to go down to the surface of the moon in lots of different places for shorter duration times. Potentially we'll build a lunar base, probably near the South Pole, and that will be another longer duration place. And potentially you could think of it like an Antarctica science station, where lots of countries around the world all work together for scientific research purposes. But we're also going to have a place where people can travel up and down to the lunar surface, and then back to Earth from the Gateway. So Artemis 1, the first step in the big succession of missions within this, already happened. So this launched in November and splashed down in December, and it was a completely robotic mission. We were testing out lots of different things, making sure, you know, our systems were working, our spacecraft was working. We always, always, always test excessively at NASA. It is very, very important to us to keep people safe, especially, but also to keep robotic assets safe in terms of, you know, it's very expensive to build missions, and we want to make sure they work when we get out wherever we're trying to go with that spacecraft. So Artemis 1 checked things out in spectacular fashion. This is looking back at the Earth and the Moon from Artemis 1. Artemis 2 underway. We have already selected the astronaut crew for Artemis 2. So already, which is very important, we have a person of color and a woman who will be riding out on this spacecraft, going out around the moon. So this Artemis mission will not touch down on the lunar surface, but once again, we're stepping closer to the moon by checking things out, getting people ready, getting people trained, and that will lead the way, pave the way even further for Artemis 3, which is where we will be sending astronauts once again to the surface of the moon. So this is coming. This is obviously an artist's conception, but just making sure, and this is coming ahead. So we're getting ready. How are we doing that? We're doing a lot of different things. So one thing I'm choosing to highlight for you today is one of my favorite experiences for the preparation. This is from a trip to Iceland I took recently with a science team and an operations team. So right now you see the person with the pink earmuffs on, that's actually an astronaut Jasmine Mogabelli. The person with the National Geographic hat on, another astronaut. The person in the blue shirt pointing at a picture, he is one of the lead geology trainers for the astronauts. The person all in black next to him is one of the people who's building the instruments for Artemis astronauts. And the person in the other hat in between the blue shirt and the pink hair band, he is the one who tells astronauts what to do when they do EVAs, when they do extravehicular activities from the International Space Station right now. And he is also going to be the person who's telling astronauts what to do on the lunar surface when we're out there. So we're training, testing equipment. Oh my goodness, the testing and the documentation of the testing. So many things to check out. And we're doing it with a combination of science and operations. So we don't want to just know, okay, go here, go to the left, go to the right, dig this hole. We want to tell the astronauts why. And why is for the science motivation and objectives. So the astronauts are coming to learn from the scientists, seeing how they do fieldwork, learning why they do fieldwork, so that they can be better representatives of the scientific community on the surface of the moon or Mars or wherever they're going. We're also testing because it's really important to have good experiences in weird environments. So for example, we are doing a lot of night testing because it's very dark at the south pole of the moon because of how it's only tilted a tiny bit towards the Earth or a little bit towards the sun in its orbit. So there's really long shadows. The sun is just skimming the horizon. We've got some cool videos of that if you're interested. But we're practicing in those kind of unusual illumination environments to get ready. So this is, again, Jasmine Mogabelli, one of the astronauts who was learning how to operate in these kind of environments with these kind of tools. And right now, she's the commander of the latest mission on the International Space Station. So she was my bunkmate in Iceland, and now she's in space. And I'm just like, that is so cool. We were both calling home, talking to our kids, and it was just so cool that now she's up in space. So very, very cool. And it's really fun to be able to see what's going on and how much they're learning and how much they're soaking in to get ready. Astronauts are also getting ready by learning in classroom environments, just like, you know, all of us did and many continue to do. And they're doing it with a lot of data, lots of data from lots of instruments in lots of places, but here I'm focusing in on data from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. So this mission, again, is at the moon right now. It's NASA's flagship mission at the moon. It's studying the radiation environment of the moon, the thermal environment of the moon, the shape of the moon in great detail. That bumpy pattern is from our LOLA Lunar Orbiter Laser Altimeter. Lots and lots and lots of different types of data. Be happy to talk about them if you'd like. But one in particular is just our camera. Our camera systems are amazing. If you went to the moon and you lay down and you made a moon angel, we could see you. That is the kind of resolution we have with our high resolution cameras. And so this is really important. And I think it's really fun to think about where we came from. So this is not even Apollo era. This is like leagues beyond Apollo era. But before the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, if we wanted to land astronauts on the moon, this was the best information we had about what the surface looked like and the shape of it. With the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, even only early in its mission, we have this kind of resolution. So when we're going back to the moon this time, we are going to have so much more information. It's going to be so much safer and more specific about where we're going, why we're going. It makes me really impressed with the Apollo astronauts, even more than I was just imagining the unknowns that they were leaping into. But it also makes me feel good for our Artemis astronauts, who will be really more prepared, although perhaps overwhelmed with information. So where are we going? So this time, all those numbers that you saw on the front, those are all the Apollo landing sites. You'll be able to see that we landed near the equator on the near side of the moon. Those were for safety reasons. It's easier to land near the equator than it is to land at the poles. So here we go. And it's also important for communications because the same side of the moon always is facing the Earth. So that helps us have constant communication. Now we're zeroing in on the south pole of the moon. We're stopping the moon. We're freezing the moon in your view. And now what's happening is the sun is going around the moon from our perspective that we've frozen in space here. And so what's really cool about the south pole of the moon are these shadows and these sunlit areas. So this is over the course of a few months that we're looking at. You'll see that some places never get sunlight. Those places that we call permanently shadowed regions are some of the most interesting places because they're extremely cold and have trapped potentially thousands, hundreds, millions, we don't really know, years of, the lunar environment in, we think, ice cores. We have evidence of ice at the pole, of the poles, and so we're going to go look for it. And we also have something else up here, and this is a compilation of what you just saw, that model that is from our Lunar Orbiter Laser Altimeter data and our Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter camera data put together. This is what that looks like over many months. So the places that are dark get very, very little sunlight. So every time the sun appeared somewhere here, it got a white pixel, and every time it was dark, it got a dark pixel. And then we added up all of those pixels over time, and you get this map of where we're likely to find, water ice, although we also have information from another instrument looking specifically for water. And then we also know where we can get sunlight, which is power. So those are very important. Adding that with the shape of the moon, with the slopes, so that we know where we can land safely, as well as the rocks that we are mapping across the surface, we're getting a really good sense of where we should go and how to go there, land there safely in areas in rich scientific interest. Something else I'll mention, because it's timely, is that we're also doing other things. So there's some pretty obvious preparation to get ready to go back to the moon. And then there's maybe some less obvious preparation. So I was just in a meeting recently with the Artemis 3 project scientist. So he will be leading science for the first mission with people on the moon in decades. And he is so excited about OSIRIS-REx sample return because he calls it a great precursor to Artemis. It's the first time a pristine sample from space is being returned to the Earth in decades. And we are getting ready to collect it. We're getting ready to transport it, we are going to preserve it, we're going to curate it, we're going to loan out pieces of this sample to scientists all over the world. And so it's a great way to get ready to do that again for the moon. So there's lots of ways in which our science and our operations are connected, and this I think is a really neat one. I'm going to finish off sort of here with a last topic, just mentioning that there are lots of other opportunities. So if you're excited about the eclipse, just 1 week later, there's an event called International Observe the Moon Night. I do happen to be the director of this program, but it's not only for that reason that I hope that you participate. So this is a day each year that we invite everyone on Earth to go out and look at the moon, observe the moon, to learn about the moon, and to celebrate the moon in our arts and our culture, our sciences, our personal, our individual connections to the moon. Everything that the moon has touched in our lives, this is an opportunity to be like, hey, did you know that like month is named for moon? Or hey, did you know that like coral reef, like they are driven, their cycles are driven by the moon? Or, thinking about, the tides in different areas, or thinking about, oh, I get to go hiking by moonlight. This is actually on a first quarter moon because it's high in the sky in the evening, and that's a great time to observe the moon. And we also have a lot of astronomers that like to participate in this event. And it's actually, in my opinion, a little bit cooler to look at the moon through a telescope when there's that line between day and night, when there's that terminator, because along that line is one of the coolest places to look with binoculars or through a telescope, because that rugged lunar terrain can really pop out, and you can really imagine this as a world that you could explore, that I could explore, that astronauts will explore. So I hope you'll participate in this. If you're interested, there's lots and lots and lots of information on moon.nasa.gov/observe. And I'll just point to a few things. One is that we specifically make maps every year for this event, new ones every year with different things that you can see, and a little bit of information about them. We have them both for northern and southern hemispheres. We also this year have a special eclipse edition, an annular eclipse edition, encouraging you to start a moon observation journal on the day of the annular solar eclipse, a day that you can see a new moon, which is not something we can often see, and then continue observations through International Observe the Moon Night and beyond to really, get to know our nearest neighbor in space, or encourage students to do that. So I hope you check that out. And then we have lots and lots more information as well. So I will wrap it up here by just saying there are so many ways that you can learn more about eclipses, about lunar science and exploration, and so many other things with NASA. So there's a few resources. The main NASA Eclipse website is solarsystem.nasa.gov/eclipses. Lunar science is concentrated on moon.nasa.gov, and right within there is International Observe the Moon Night. So it's just moon.nasa.gov/observe. And then there are a few other ones here that are just sort of kind of cool places to get involved. And again, I'll send all of those to Great Basin National Park so that if you're interested, you can keep up. And with that, I really thank you for your time and your attention, and I am happy to take questions. So I will stop sharing because then I can see your questions. But thank you, everyone. This has been really fun.
So thank you very much. It was really fun to learn more, and I'm really excited about the Artemis expeditions. It's exciting to see the progress that's been made. So we're going to open it up to question and answers. And again, if you bring your cursor down to the bottom of your screen, you can open up the Q&A. And in it, the host and the panelists can see the questions. So if you have a question, go ahead and put it on there. I can say one question that popped up in the chat was when you were showing photos of the Artemis preparation. There was a guy with really funny knee pads. And so,
oh, yeah.
So that question was like, what's with the knee pads?
What's with the knee pads? That's such a good question. I appreciate the question. I should have gone into it right then. So something that was very, very easy to see in the field that apparently was hard to see in a lab when we were getting ready for the field was the people who wanted the knee pads tested put them on a pair of pants with Velcro. And they just said, okay, here's the knee pad, fits on the Velcro, great, go wear them in the field, test them out. They hadn't actually put a person in the pair of pants. And so when there was a 3D leg in that pair of pants, the Velcro no longer fit, and the knee pads completely just popped off right away. So it was like such an easy thing of like, right, if there was a person wearing these clothing, it wouldn't fit like it would a flat pair of pants. And so it was just such a quick, like, wow, this is why we test. Like even things that you're like, duh, come on, NASA. Well, NASA now has pants that have firmly affixed knee pads for the next round of tests because we tried it out. This was like the knee pads, to be fair, had just been created right before we left. And so they didn't really have a whole lot of time to worry about the pants because they're really going to go on an astronaut suit, not some hiking pants. But it was just kind of a fun, like, here is a great demonstration of testing and why it matters. I also see George has a comment about a hard time loving the moon because of deep sky photography for astrophotography. I totally hear that. I feel like the moon will go through phases though. So if it's gonna do that, you might as well love on the moments when you can really get some people hooked in. I love the moon because I feel like it's a nice stepping stone to other places. So like at NASA, we always, for International Observe the Moon Night, we invite every science division because everyone can find a place there. And we really try to encourage, start with the moon and then continue observing the skies, observing the world around you, like going deeper. We always have, planets that are up. We point to them next and say, hey, look at this one as well. But it's just sort of like a familiar, comforting starting place. Like a lot of people are like, hey, the moon used to follow me home when I was a kid, or, like my kid is pointing it out in space. And so there's just like something there that if you are reaching out to people who might not be interested in space, you might be able to get them in with the moon. Whereas it's a little less accessible if you're like starting with, this deep sky object for sometimes. And other times you're like, come here and look at this fuzzy thing, and then blow their mind, that way too. And I think do both. Go for all of the above.
Yeah. Thanks for addressing that because I was going to bring that up too because it was a good comment within it. We have a question. Why the south pole of the moon? Is there something there we're more likely to discover?
Yeah, so the south pole of the moon is certainly not the only interesting area. I mean, we could land anywhere and it would be amazing. But the South Pole has a few things really going for it. One is that it has near constant sunlight in some of those places, like on the tops of the mountains. So near constant sunlight means near constant source of energy. So we can put up solar panels and have continual energy to power up all the things that we need. With those same, solar panel type things, we can also have a near constant communication, direct line of sight communication with Earth. So we can get that all over the near side, but including the poles. On the far side, we'd have to have some sort of orbiter or relay satellite because we're always having the same side of the moon facing the Earth. So we have power, we have communications, and then we also have those really fascinating concentrations of ice, water ice, like we know it's there, and we'd really like to understand, the volatile history of the moon, and that tells a lot of the near history and potentially deeper history. It's also a possible resource. I wouldn't get out my drinking glass quite yet. We have tested some of the chemistry of the water, and there is mercury found in the same places as, the hydrogen and oxygen. So that's not really good for astronauts, but it might be something that we could use for rocket fuel, for example, or for other ways. If we purify it, maybe we could, use that water in other places. And it's so important to us as people that it's worth, learning a little bit more about to see whether we can use this as a resource and how we could use this as a resource. So a resource for sustaining people on the surface and also scientifically interesting. And I'll add one more that is really close to the South Pole Aitken Basin, which is the largest known impact crater in the solar system, actually, the largest confirmed one. And it basically dug a big hole, potentially down to the moon's mantle. And so if we could get samples from there, we could really learn a tremendous amount about the evolution of the moon, of the Earth-Moon system, of planets over time. I was just talking with Barbara Cohen, who is the Artemis 4 project scientist. So she's going to be in charge of the science of the second landed mission on the moon with people. And she said that the thing she wants more than anything else in her entire career, which is already amazing, is a sample from the South Pole Aitken Basin. She feels like that would tell her more than anything else she's ever learned from any other sample or any other data that she's collected so far. So just a really, really rich scientific area. Again, not the only one, but just one that has a lot of those things lining up. And we can land there. Like, that's helpful. Like, it's good to go somewhere you can land.
All right, we're gonna bring it back to Earth for a second, because the next question is, where in Great Basin National Park would be a fun place to observe the eclipse?
Ooh, that's for you.
Yeah, at Great Basin, there is there's a night sky amphitheater that is just beside the visitor center. And so that's where one place that is set up for viewing the night sky. That would be amazing. If you want to go to a place with less people, you could, again, look at some of the other campgrounds and also just work your way up the mountain to some of the lookouts in it. So the other question that we have, it seems like the annular eclipse in October and the total eclipse in April are happening extraordinarily close in time. And he's like 7 months, so he's good at math. Does this happen very often, and where on Earth?
So we actually do get eclipses kind of in sets because of where the Earth and moon and sun are in space. And so, like, thinking back to some of those early visualizations, the moon is tilted a little bit with respect to the ecliptic. And so for the ascending node, it was like where it's coming up over, and descending was where it's going down under. So basically, though, it's just tilted. And so, but sometimes that plane, let's just do, here's that plane and here's the other plane, and there's intersections there, and on the intersections is where you can have eclipses. And so it just so happens that with that orientation, you will get a few in a row. So you'll get like a set of eclipses coming back to back, and lunar and solar eclipses are generally stacked. What doesn't always happen is where on Earth you get to see them, and also where you are on Earth in the US, you get to see them. So the stacking is typical. I'm not answering this super elegantly. We actually have a lot of information about specifically like how many are often coming together, and I should really brush up on that. So I appreciate the question. And also, you know, lunar and solar eclipses tend to be, you know, close together as well, but sometimes they're partial and sometimes they're total. So it does make sense because of how the orbits are lining up, but it is not something that we get to experience from the same parts of Earth very often.
Thank you. All right, the next question, why is it more dangerous to look at the sun during a partial eclipse versus the total eclipse?
Wait, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the beginning.
Why is it more dangerous to look at the sun during a partial eclipse?
Okay, so it's actually just dangerous to look at the sun. So that's really all you need to remember. So you shouldn't look at the sun unless you really can't see the sun. So during a total eclipse, the sun's entire bright disk is blocked by the moon. And so when the entire disk is blocked by the moon, then it's safe to look at the sun because all you can see is the wispy outer layer of its atmosphere, the corona, and that is not that bright compared to the rest of the sun. So it's still pretty bright, and you'll still be able to see it, and it looks amazing, incredible, so neat, but it's not going to hurt your eyes. And so that's when it's safe. if you can see any portion of that brilliant bright disk, it's really not good for your eyes. So there are people who are like, hey, I want to see the Bailey's beads, like just I want to see that, or like the ring or something like that. And I mean, you can do what you want with your eyes. I'm just here to tell you that like it is not advised. It can do damage, and it can even do permanent damage to your eyes if you look at the sun, especially for a long period of time. And in an annular eclipse, you never have the whole disk blocked. Like there's never a moment where the whole sun is behind the moon. And so you just want to keep your eclipse glasses on, or use like a pinpoint projector, or use some other sort of eye protection. There's lots of different options. We list a lot of them on the NASA website. Those of you who are amateur astronomers or professional astronomers know like lots of different things too, or look at the shadows underneath trees and leaves and things like that. So there are safe ways to view it, but it's just don't look at the sun. That's the whole advice. And like for total eclipse also, don't look at the sun until it's blocked. So every stage of partial, before and after that totality, that moment, you should have eye protection on.
So are there any other questions or observations? We also got a tip in the chat, October 14th. Annular is early morning, so watch out for that Friday night party in Ely, which shows that.
Good tip.
There's one more question in here that's a good one. What's the plan for cleaning up all of the debris we're dumping on the other worlds? All of the junk orbiting Earth is already making space flight very dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, those are good questions. So, I mean, we are very careful about what we're taking and where we're taking it. But I will say, yeah, there's a lot of space debris around our planet. It's actually making it kind of difficult to launch satellites and keep them safe and keep our astronauts safe on the International Space Station. We are at NASA tracking a lot of that, and others are as well. But we can only track the bigger pieces, and some things are very small and can still do a lot of damage. So it is a real concern at Earth. And we are also like, we're getting not a whole lot of space debris so much at the moon, but we are getting a lot of neighbors up there. So LRO, our team is in communication with several other different orbiters that are going up or are there right now or are planning to go. And so we're tracking, because we sometimes have some close calls and we have to do some shifts in our orbit to stay safe, and we stay like pretty far away, so it's not even close, but it is something that we're thinking about. And what we bring to the moon or to other places, it stays. It's tremendously difficult to bring anything back to Earth, so we have to be careful. But I think that's something we should be thinking about, of course, for our own planet, but I think for other planets as well. And we have a lot of international treaties about things like that in order to try to be good citizens of our solar system.
All right. Next question. You agreed that was a good question to ask, and then follows it up with, does NASA still own the landers, or are they up for salvage grabs?
Ooh, I don't know that for sure. I don't know if NASA owns. I think that we may, but I will also say that like a lot of our spacecraft aren't just NASA. So we have, a lot of partners that help build a lot of spacecrafts. And so presumably every country that contributed owns some portion of that spacecraft. But I do know that there are protections in place, like for example, for the Apollo landing sites, like there are protections in place, and there are more like going into effect or are proposed. At least I don't know the specifics, but basically either they are or they are in the works to become international parks. So that it's like going to the moon, you can stay back behind these stanchions. Don't step on Neil Armstrong's footprint. That is an international treasure. And I think, we have a lot of that. We do have, some spacecraft that have been, have struck the moon either intentionally or not, and I don't know about the restrictions around there. I do also know that we did actually return one piece from an Apollo mission back to Earth to find out like what the weathering was like on the moon, to see, you know, how to better protect our spacecraft and our people for future missions. But that's such a cool question. I like that. I'll have to look that up. That's a very cool question.
Good. Well, we've made it to the top of the hour. I can say that hour really did go by fast. As a follow-up, you'll be receiving an email next week that, again, will have some of the links in it that you can get to, and then also just a questionnaire so that we know that we're being good stewards with our time and getting you all good educational opportunities within it. With that, I do want to just say thank you to our presenter, Andrea Jones. It was really great to see, and I totally agree with what was just posted in the chat. That's a very good presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank all of you for coming. And you know, I'm really excited. If anyone wants to follow up, my email is public. It's just andrea.j.jones@nasa.gov, and happy to take questions or, you know, hear about your eclipse experiences. But I hope you have a wonderful time in Great Basin National Park, and I hope everyone going other places has a wonderful time as well. So enjoy it. It's like a really spectacular moment of like scientific prediction and then it coming real, like you get to witness it, and it's wonderful. So I hope all of you feel that power and that connection.
Thank you all. I think we're pretty well wrapped up. People are dropping off.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope you have a great time in Great Basin.